PGA Nation, we have returned for another week of some golf goodness, and I am excited. You know, they got the buzz going about the new Netflix series, which got my juices flowing. Now, it probably won't be for another year, but it's still exciting. It's something to talk about. Our trusted friend and co-host is back. Sia, we missed you last week. Welcome back to the show. And before I pass it over to you to say hi to everyone, you have been on this incredible heater over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Just hitting, I'm not just talking hitting like, head-to-head matchups, hitting first-round leaders, hitting first touchdown scores. We're going to keep the momentum going. But Sia, tell me, how you doing it?
Pretty great. I've been on such a heater that I'm almost like I'm kind of getting lucky too. So so I had 3 outrights in a row, which is like pretty crazy. And then I had a head-to-head matchup on Sunday. I had Corey Connors versus, I can't remember. It was either Saturday or Sunday. Anyway, it was somebody that wasn't Corey Connors' caliber. It was like minus 125. He was going into the final hole down 1. And by the way, a draw wouldn't have helped me. Like I needed him to actually win. And he eagles the hole, and it was like an easy par 5. He eagles the hole, and it was Saturday, now that I think about it, and whoever he was going up against parred the hole somehow, and I ended up winning by 1, and it was kind of a big head-to-head bet for me. So it's like, man, when you're running good, you're running good. And then, of course, when you're running bad, you're running bad. So it's kind of like the lesson there, not that you were searching for one, but for anybody listening, it's like you have to remember when you're running really good for those bad times, because the bad times make you think like, oh, man, this I just never get it right. I always get unlucky, and I'm guilty of doing the same thing. But man, when you remember like these times, it's like, all right, there's some good luck as well. So anyway,
and also when you're on a heater like that means it's time for everyone else to just ride the wave, right? Like we go to the ocean, the waves are coming, the big one comes, like, oh, I want to get on that wave and ride that in. Well, Sia's on this big wave right now. I'm going to ride it in. I'm going to see whatever you got this week, I'm on, because it's working and we're going to cash in on it. And then when he gets cold, we'll go off it. But for now, let's ride that wave.
Fair enough.
And then we got Spence. Man, how you doing this week? I liked some of your plays last week. You're feeling good too. This show is kind of, it's not just the Sia heater. The whole show is on a heater. And I don't envy you this week because, as everyone knows, Spencer gives the best course breakdown that you're going to find in the business. He'll tell you what to look for every week. And this week, there's 3 different courses. So I don't know how you're going to do that, but good luck. Tell me how you're going to do it.
Do we have enough showtime for 3 course breakdowns?
I think we do.
No, I'm completely kidding about that. But it's tough when you get these split rotational events, especially when 2 of the courses lack stat tracker whatsoever. I do think from a game theory standpoint that you can be a little more aggressive on your builds because you are locked into 75% of the rounds from everyone. That doesn't necessarily mean stars and scrubs, but it does suggest being willing to take more chances. But none of that exactly helps us on what to do from a modeling perspective. I would expect most people listening to think that I'm going to turn this into some in-depth breakdown where I try to mold together 3 courses with this exact specification of, every single time they've been played, what we're looking for. But I don't think that that's doable because of the lack of info on La Quinta and the Nicholas tournament course. And I also don't think it's the best recipe for success in general. Instead, I decided to try and figure out any similarities I could find between the 3 stops and use some of the basic concrete data to form an educated but very condensed version of what we might expect. So I will keep this rather brief and just run down what stats I did look at for the week. I started with strokes gained total at courses under 7,200 yards that are easy to make birdie for 25%. We know all 3 of these are within the bottom 15 on tour in length. They are also within the top 15 when it comes to ease. That is something that is not debatable, and that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about with this breakdown. Let's figure out what we can easily transfer with the lack of data we have and try to form a model that way. I did 20% on par 5 birdie or better percentage. All 3 courses have 4 par 5s that are going to be your most natural scoring chances. 25% on total driving. That is a 65-35 split of distance over accuracy. What I like about that statistic is that there is extensive bunkering on these tracks, including fairway bunkers that can present some issues. You can mostly clear the danger with the distance portion. The accuracy will help set up better scoring chances since all 3 consistently rank near the top of all stops in birdie or better percentage when playing out of the fairway. I ended up putting 10% on GIR percentage out of the fairway bunkers. That goes with the above portion. a weighted par 3 for 10%. I condensed it to par 3 average and bogey avoidance. You could get deeper with it and include proximity ranges, but I decided to bypass the proximity totals and putting overall. Maybe that's the incorrect mindset, but when you get courses that are this easy or as easy as these 3, some of that almost burdens a model, in my opinion. I like using proximity more when the courses become more challenging, not these shootouts where anything flies. And then strokes gained total on Pete Dye for 10%. That only applies to the stadium course, but once again, that's where 50% of the rounds will take place, including the Sunday finish. So that model yielded a top 5 of Jon Rahm, Patrick Cantlay, Scotty Scheffler, Sung J M, and Tony Finau. So that's right in line with what you would expect to see with the pricing this week.
I love it. See, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was going to say, first of all, thank you. But Joel, I wanted to pipe in here because I want to ask you both something real quick. And I think a lot of people going into this tournament, they understand there's a course rotation here, but a lot of them don't necessarily understand that the cut is after round 3. So Joel, I'll start with you. I mean, do you kind of, in this, we got this in our Discord chat too. Do you treat this kind of more like a no-cut event because we really do have 3 full rounds for everybody and you can kind of take some chances? Or are you still kind of approaching it the same way you would with a normal cut?
I think it's a fair point. I think what makes it extra interesting, it is like 154 golfers. It's a pretty big field. There's a lot of guys to consider. I think it's a really fair point. I haven't thought about it that way, but I do think you can probably almost treat it more similar to a no-cut event. The biggest difference to me is more typically those no-cut events start off small, right? They start with 50 to 70 golfers. This is a full field, so you're going to get a lot of guys playing 3 days. So which makes it a little bit more challenging. You still need, to hit on some guys at 154 golfers, but I think you can take that approach a little bit because you get 3 days guaranteed.
Yeah, just to add to that, I guess the only difference I would say is that I'm not necessarily looking for the stars and scrubs approach, because if you forfeit 18 holes out of a player, you're not going to win based off of that. But I do think you can take a more aggressive approach in some of your lineup construction with it. I think you can find guys that are lower in ownership that your model, like some of those guys that you might be a little bit afraid that would miss a cut. I will throw one random name out there, like a guy like Gary Woodland, to where the form hasn't necessarily been great, but if it turns around, he has win equity to him, that he could win the tournament. And, we're looking at a guy that's going to be marginally owned, at least compared to what he should be for a skill level wise. And we're going to get into this with all these guys because there's a bunch of players that are making their first start this year. And a lot of times that means that we don't know where these guys are with their games. So a Gary Woodland, a Jason Day, these guys might
we go.
Well,
here we go.
We have
So Spencer, just so you know, the over-under on when you were going to say Jason Day, it was about 9 minutes, and the over came in. Oh, no, we're only 8 minutes in. The under came in. Wow.
That's bad pricing. We should have, in reality, it should have been about 5 minutes. I could have fit that into the course breakdown real easily, even though he's never played here before.
See, that's the thing. The bookmakers were like, well, he has to do the course breakdown first. Is he going to incorporate it? If not, then we have a chance for this over to come in. Mind you, it was minus 140, but still.
Well, the next thing will be how many mentions are there, and I'm sure that number is ridiculously high.
Indeed.
One thing I do want to add with the being 4 days, it probably has a bigger effect to me in cash games or small tournaments, because you could probably cash or do really well with 5 out of 6 because they're getting those 3 days, right? They have a guy miss the cut and still make money. In a big GPP, you're going to need all 6. That's just how you're going to get all those points. But in smaller tournaments and cash games, like, you might not need everyone. So you can go maybe more stars and scrubs if you think that's the build, because you'll have those guaranteed extra 18 holes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
All right. Well, this is going to be a fun week for sure. I think what we know about this course is at least the final course, the stadium course, is challenging. It's going to give some guys, a test, especially early in the season where we're like Spence said, we're looking to get an idea of where are these guys, right? We haven't seen them in quite some time. Where's their games at? I think we can go and dive right into this top field. And the pricing to me is, in my opinion, a little soft up top. So, Spence, you want to start us off at the top?
Yeah, I think most of these ranges we talk about will have a very limited differential in win equity. We can get into what that means when we discuss some of the $9,000 versus $8,000 golfers in a second, but there is a spike on pretty much all four of these in the 10K zone. You can probably add Sungjae to this mix too, but Sungjae, Scheffler, and Finau are more likely to win than the players beneath them. And then Rahm and Cantlay are better than the Sungjae, Scheffler, and Finau group. So all of that puts us in a bit of a precarious position. For me, it comes down to ownership for how I want to try and leverage my builds. The first order of business would be deciphering between Rahm and Cantlay. As I mentioned, they're number 1 and 2 in my model. So, while they are the two best on the board, I'm going to find myself underweight to Cantlay for two core reasons. One, it only takes $400 more to move up to the number 1 player in the world. And two, he's currently projected to be lower owned than Cantlay. There are within 0.5% on my model right now, so I'm sure that could flip. But there isn't going to be a large enough difference for why I wouldn't want to get up to Rahm if I can. Cantlay is probably my least favorite of the four for that reason. I talked about this with Stick Picks on the Better Golf Pod, and I think he's gotten me off as Scheffler a little bit. There are some red flags in my model. I think from a leverage standpoint, he does make some sense. But for me, it's probably going to be Rahm. And then as a leverage play, it's going to be Finau. You're not going to have a horrible selection with any of these guys because I do think pricing is good. Everybody above $8,000 is in the top 30 of my model. That's usually the nightmare situation when something like that happens. But to me, it's Rahm and Finau.
I like it. See, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. So I'm probably going to be off Scotty Scheffler, even though I will admit that he's a great course fit, because one of the things I'm looking at, in a very simplistic way, sort of outside the parameters of Spencer's model, is just straight up DK points in birdie or better gained, however you're looking at that. And obviously Scheffler is going to be right up there. Last 50 rounds, he's number 3 there. So no surprise, but I also think there's some red flags there. And honestly, the thing about Finau, you guys know I'm not a big Finau fan, but when I look at these top 4 guys, I think Rahm and Cantlay are going to carry the most ownership, and at least with respect to the top guys. And what I'm seeing different ownership projections than you guys are. I'm on a different site, or I don't know, Spencer and Joel, how which ones you're looking at, but I actually see Rahm a little bit higher than Patrick Cantlay. Either way, they're both going to be really high. I just think the pure math of taking Tony Finau makes a lot of sense. So I'm either taking Rahm because he's the best player in the world, or I'm taking Finau because I just love the leverage I'm getting from an ownership standpoint. And I do think he has some win equity as well. I know that there's, we talk about Finau in sort of different terms, but I love the idea that I can get leverage with Tony Finau. So that's what I'm going to do.
I like it. So, with me, I want to talk about Finau because you both like him, and I usually love Finau. I am someone that always looks to go to Finau. My concern or my hesitation with Finau this week is I love picking up Finau when he's 8K, 8,500, kind of getting overlooked, and then he has that week where he kind of climbs up the leaderboard. With Finau having to be pretty much one of your premier guys, if not your premier guy, I don't love him as much. I do think he has win equity. That's not what I'm saying. I just don't think, he's not a value player. He's really got to be your top guy. And I just think, like you guys said, Rahm is head and shoulders above the field. Even at 20% ownership at this price, I feel like he's underpriced. They could put Rahm at 12.5, and I would be like, that seems fair to me. I mean, this is the best player in this field. So I just want to get as much overweight on Rahm as I can. And because of that, it's just hard to play anyone else in this range.
So here's the thing about Finau, and I agree with what you said about him, but okay, a couple things to consider. In the fall swing, he wasn't very good, particularly with the putter. Prior to that, he wasn't good on approach. Like, his game hasn't really been great. There's certain parts of his game that haven't been great. And the fact that he's high priced, like you said, Joel, that's what's keeping ownership down. Like, all 3 of those factors are really, truly keeping ownership down. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a third of the ownership as the other guys in this range, or at least some of the other guys in this range. And with that said, I love the unknown of some of these players in this tournament, including Tony Finau, that we haven't seen. And last we checked, we didn't see anything good, but we know his pedigree. So early in the season, I genuinely like taking guys that maybe hadn't played well the last 4, 5, 6, 7 tournaments, but we know they have it in them to play well, and they become kind of forgotten. So that's sort of going to be a theme for some of the players I end up selecting, is guys that are like, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait to see what I see, or maybe they're a little overpriced. I think that's where you get a lot of the ownership leverage. But to your point, if it's Rahm versus Finau, and we're just talking head to head, of course, I like Rahm better.
That is a really good point, especially for a tournament like this to kind of take some shots on guys who just have pedigree, right? Because you're right, there's not much of a recent form to look at because of the break. So I think fair, all fair, good points. All right, let's keep this train moving down to the 9K range. Sia, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I mean, this range is really, really good. I don't think you can make an argument against many of these guys. I can tell you there's 5 guys that really jump out to me. And of course, I'm going to narrow it down from there. But let me just give you the 5 that really jump out to me. Taylor Gooch, Seamus Power, Corey Connors. I'm going to skip over Matthew Wolff. I assume somebody else is going to talk about him. Abraham Answer and Will Zalatoris. Of those 5, I think I'm off of Answer and I'm off of Taylor Gooch. I really like Corey Connors. I kind of like Seamus Power, but if I had to pick 2 guys in this range, it's Corey Connors and it's the unknown of Will Zalatoris, who, by the way, everybody thinks has a terrible putter, and maybe he does. But if you actually look at his last 5 tournaments, first of all, ball striking is immaculate. It's excellent, period. But if you look at his putter over the last 5 tournaments, he lost strokes in a couple of them, but he actually gained strokes in 3 of them, 3 of the 5. So if the putter is turned around, and if he carries little ownership, and we know what his ball striking prowess is on a ball striker's course, it seems to me that he is, to me, especially early in the season when you have to, like, if you want to win tournaments, you might have to like spring early on some of these guys. What were we saying about Will Zalatoris a year ago? This guy was like the second coming, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, Will Zalatoris, yeah, that might be a neat play. I mean, I'm not so sure. Like, this is the type of guy, in my opinion, that can actually win you a GPP. So considering how popular the other guys are going to be, namely Abraham Answer, Corey Connors, and they're popular for good reason, I'm going to be on Will Zalatoris probably more than anybody, and Corey Connors is my silver medal in this 9K range.
I love it. How about you, Spence? Who are you looking at here?
Yeah, I don't love this $9,000 group as a whole. My biggest problem is I think that the ownership around some of these guys are very extreme when you have about as much win equity in the $8,000 range. But there are 3 guys that I don't mind putting into lineups. I think they're very much in play. The first would be Taylor Gooch, and he intrigues me just because of the price and the ownership. I don't think that either one is that outlandish. I know we're going to see this price tag on him, and it's going to jump off the page that he's $9,700. He doesn't necessarily belong there, but I don't agree with that. I mean, I think he's well within the realm of what's plausible for what he should be. We've seen him with, a couple top 21s in the past 3 years at this tournament. And then the other 2 that I think are highly worth considering in GPPs, and Sia touched on both of them, it's Matthew Wolff and it's Will Zalatoris. I think those are the 2 guys that you can create some leverage advantage if you build it that way. Like, Zalatoris a year ago was legitimately like Mito Pereira became that last year for everybody for a very short time period, but not even to the level that Will Zalatoris got to. Zalatoris was the number 1 guy in popularity almost for a 4 or 5 month span there. And now, as Sia said, he's kind of a guy like, yeah, he could maybe turn it around. We'll see what happens, but I like his skill set. I think he's going to have a good year, and I think this is going to be a good bounce back for him after whatever last year. And the same thing with Wolff. I just think those are 2 guys that have win equity that's not necessarily being priced into the ownership there.
It's fair. That totally makes sense. Interesting that you guys are aligned. I'm on different guys here. For me, there's 2 guys that I'm really looking at in this range, and unfortunately for me, I'm going to eat a little bit of chalk. I think there's 2 guys that stand out. In one, Sung Jae. I think this course just makes a lot of sense for Sung Jae, especially the way, I mean, his driver has been immaculate. I think that's going to help him a lot this week. And he's also, I mean, maybe not as recently, but Sung Jae has the ability to, or the tendency to kind of pop around the green and really, have some really gain a lot of strokes there in certain tournaments. So if he has one of those weeks, this could be a perfect course fit for him. I do think he's a little bit overpriced, and you're paying a little bit more ownership than you probably want for him here. But I think a lot of the stars align for him this week. In a field that, after the first 10, 15 guys really does drop off a bit. So I do think he is one of the better golfers. In addition to Sung Jae, I like Abraham Answer. Abraham Answer now I think is actually a pretty good price. Like, if someone had put him in the top of this 9K range, no one would have batted an eye. So I think you can save a couple $100 in value by going with Answer. And I really like the fact that he has 2 top 5s the last 2 times coming out in this tournament, tied for 18th the 3rd time before that. So he's shown success here. His ball striking wasn't poor last week when he went out or the week before. He just missed the guy. I think he missed some putts, but I think his form will be there. And I think this is a type of field and tournament that Answer can definitely pop in. So those are the two guys here in this 9K range I'll be looking at. Unfortunately for me, I admit I'll be eating some chalk, but I feel a little bit more comfortable eating that chalk this week, knowing that there's 150 golfers, and then it's going to be hard. Like, there's not going to be duplicate lineups. That's not my concern, right? It's just, finding my ability to get different elsewhere in my lineups.
Can I add one point to that really quickly? And it's a good thing that you mentioned about Sung Jae, and I even said it at the beginning of this. I don't know what to do with him on DraftKings. I think he's a great one and done play. That ownership is the only thing that scares me, but I think he's safe, and he is the most similar to the Finau's and the Scheffler. Like, he is right in that tier with all those guys. You could swap him with Finau. You could swap him with Scheffler, and I don't think anybody would really bat an eye for that price tag. I mean, he would be a little bit overpriced on it, but you could make that same argument about those guys at the way that they are right now in that $10,000 range. So I like your thought process with Sung Jae. The ownership's the only thing that scares me, but it's not so much so that I'm like willing to get off of him. And Answer has great course history at this tournament.
Totally. And just quickly, before we move on to the next category, while we're talking about ownership, a thought that came through my head, I want to run by you guys is, I probably valued ownership maybe a little bit more the last couple weeks when we were having those smaller tournaments, and there were some guys that ownership was getting up to 30% because there's just less guys to pick from. And I really wanted to get away from those types of guys, and I probably put too much into it. I'm coming down off that now that, there's bigger fields, and, still ownership is still important. I'm not taking it away, but it's just a little bit different of a perspective based on the tournament and the field. Do you guys kind of see the similar type of game theory on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Spencer, you first.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, when you add more players to the fray, lineups become more unique just naturally with it. Like, you're going to, I don't know what you guys are seeing on Sung Jae. I'm looking at about 18 to 20% on it, but that's fine. I mean, you can have them into a lineup and you can find another way to differentiate. And there are so many spots to differentiate on your builds. Like, that's why some of these guys, like, if you look at any of these guys, as I said, anybody $8,000 or up is top 30 on my model this week. That means that you're going to have random players. And Alex Noren, for example, my model doesn't necessarily love Alex Noren. I know we're not in the $8,000 range yet, but he is so under the radar that you can find ways to differentiate a build so easily with this. And with 154 players or 156, whatever the number is this week, it's much easier to get around some of those ownership pitfalls with it.
Yeah. Well, before I answer the question, though, what ownership are you seeing on Cantlay and Rahm? Because what I'm seeing that they're both in the 30% range, and that Rahm is actually higher owned.
I got 20% for Rahm and 22 for Cantlay.
Okay.
I have 21.9 for Rahm and 22.1 for Cantlay.
Okay, so clearly we'll have to wait for Steven's article tomorrow to get a definitive answer on that, because I'm seeing something different. And let me just put it to you this way. If Rahm or Cantlay were approaching 30%, I just don't think I'm interested in GPPs. I mean, that doesn't mean I can't make my lineup different. I just think when you have this big of a field and you have the variance that's built into golf, I almost never want a guy, even as good as Jon Rahm and Patrick Cantlay are playing, I almost never want a guy that's going to carry that ownership. So, Joel, I agree with you. I think if the ownership gets pretty high towards that cream of the crop part, like the Rahms, the Cantlays, the Schefflers, I think that's where I'd maybe second guess myself a little bit. I certainly wouldn't, if Rahm was like 30%, I wouldn't jam him in every GPP lineup. I just don't think the math really supports that. But to your point, there are so many guys in the 9K range that are good that you're not going to get a guy. I mean, it looks like there's a couple guys that are going to be popular, but especially the 8K and the 7K range, those fields, especially in the 7K range, it's so big. It's so easy for you to differentiate your lineup. So it's not a huge concern this week, but I kind of treat it as a week-to-week thing.
I'm totally aligned with you. See, once it does get up closer to 30, that's a different level of ownership. At 20, that's not going to scare me. At 30, that's now like, okay, that's a huge chunk of this tournament that we're
right. And just perspective-wise, if that person, whoever it may be, that's 30%, crashes and burns, like let's say Webb Simpson did last week, well, you're basically passing 1/3 of the field. assuming you don't have a guy that's like crashed and burned as well at an equal price range. So that's just something to consider.
And that's the thing that scares me with Patrick Cantlay in general, is that we're looking at 30% ownership. We're not even getting that rebate off of the John Rahm situation. Like, you can move up $400. Not saying at 30% you should necessarily be doing it with either, but Cantlay has multiple offenses against him here. And that's the problem, is that you can go down the Finau and kind of get rid of all those ownership problems, or depending on where Rahm comes in, I would be fine with him at 25-ish%. I still think that that's in play. I agree that once you get to 30, that becomes a problem. But with that being said, like, I don't necessarily think Rahm is going to burn you at this. Like, you still need a victory, but I think there's other ways that I can get unique in a build and still find win equity with it. So Rahm's the difficult one, just because he graded as well for me as any golfer ever has in 4 years of running this model. And that means something. Like, Cantlay was substantially above Scheffler and Im for me, and Rahm was about that substantially above Cantlay.
And that's the biggest thing, because Rahm it's like Rahm every week is top 10. It's not like, oh, he got like a bunch of time. It's every week. And like, to me, even though he's the highest priced golfer, it's not by enough. It's Rahm should be $1,000 more than the next person, in my opinion, at least.
So yeah, I'll be honest. I don't see it as big of a gap between, just from a talent standpoint. I know I'm in the minority there, but when I look at the metrics, and I particularly look at this tournament in DK scoring and birdie or better gain, things of that nature, I mean, Cantlay really, like, and I understand that's not what golf is reduced to, but in terms of DFS, so that's, I'm trying to simplify certain things. And I mean, he listen, I think Rahm's a better golfer, of course. I think the fact that Cantlay won the FedEx Cup is like kind of hilarious considering how that actually unfolded. But I do think Cantlay and Rahm at this tournament are they're not interchangeable, but they're close to interchangeable. That's just my take.
I think the difference for the way I look at it is, I agree. I think against each other, they're close. The Vegas line for the two of them will be in the hundreds, right? I think it's a relatively close match. I think the difference to me is Rahm's consistency. I think Cantlay, when he's playing well, is pretty close to Rahm, if not as good when he's on. But Rahm is good every week, and I feel like Cantlay is those weeks where he's up there. But I think Cantlay's going to miss a lot more cuts, and I think that's the difference. Right? I think even if Rahm doesn't win the tournament, you can still build a winning lineup, because I think he's safe that he's going to get you like in the close to 10 or something like that.
Yeah, and then that's true. You add the ownership to the Cantlay that I keep mentioning with it, and that's really where they separate themselves. Because if Cantlay was 10%, like, I agree with Sia's general notion on this, that it's not that extreme. I do think that Rahm is safer. I do think Rahm is the better golfer. Maybe it's not as much as I'm trying to make it sound like. But if you're going to say the same ownership or virtually the same ownership and a $400 difference, like, that's not a big enough discrepancy on either one of those two marks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that too. All right, well, let's keep this train moving. We're going to head down to this 8K range. Sia, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, I'm looking at Rahm's last 10 tournaments, just like how finishing position. It's pretty amazing. So he missed the cut at the Fortinet Championship. So there's that. Okay, so let me read the other 9. Just the finishing places. I'm not even going to read what tournament it was. Second, T9, third, first, withdrawal, which, by the way, would have been first. I mean, so to your point about consistency, he is a top 10 machine and pretty damn close to a top 5 like lock. It's I don't remember the last time we could, I mean, obviously outside of Tiger Woods, like even when I was making those comments about Dustin Johnson a couple of years ago, I'm not so sure that I was reading finishing positions like this. This is pretty obnoxiously good. Okay, anyway, the 8K range. There's only 3 guys I really want to talk about here. Hopefully you guys have a little bit more insight. One of them is going to be a surprise. It's not a guy I generally support at all. But when I look at things like birdie or better game, and I look at things like DK points, this guy really shows up, and that's a lot of what I'm looking for. 8,600, it's Justin Rose. Last 50 rounds, he's 8th birdie or better gained. He's 3rd in DK points. Tee to green, he's 9th, which of course is pretty great. Ball striking, he's not an extraordinaire. He's 22nd in this field, but that's clearly not bad. I think he's one of those guys that's getting overlooked, and there's good reason for it. But again, in terms of getting in early on somebody who we haven't seen in a long time, but who has pedigree, this guy really fits the bill for me. So I think I'm going to go pretty heavy on Justin Rose. I think Ricky Fowler is really interesting. I could absolutely be convinced there. Rick Gaiman on the first cut yesterday had a lot to say, and showing his metrics. It's actually way more impressive than I thought it would be in terms of his recent history. So that wasn't one of my 3 guys. I just felt like I needed to point him out. Luke List is one of the guys. I think he's going to be relatively popular, at least relative to this range. Great ball striker, terrible putter, has that like kind of Kyle Stanley in him where he just can't finish. But if the putter is even decent, he's going to be in really good shape. And at 8,000, it's kind of a bargain. Again, if the putter's decent. Jonathan Vegas is the other guy. I call him Taylor Gooch light. When you match his metrics up to Taylor Gooch, I'm not saying it's the same. It's light, but it's pretty damn similar. The ball striking is fantastic. Off the tee is great, as everybody knows. The approach game lately has actually been really good as well. The putter's a little bit worse than Taylor Gooch, but not that much worse. So I think that's a real big bargain at 8,100 for Jonathan Vegas. So it's Rose, it's Vegas, it's Luke List. Of those 3, I really like Vegas and Justin Rose the most, though.
I like it. I like it a lot. How about you, Spence? Who are you looking at here?
Yeah, I like this $8,000 range. I think Rose is one of the top options that's going to come into play at 8,600. He ranks inside the top 10 on short, easy courses and has also been a Pete Dye specialist throughout his career. I like Ricky Fowler at 8,500. I think I didn't see the show with Sia on that with Rick, but from a statistical perspective on my end, I also have some numbers that are really grading out well from him. 5 to 10% is intriguing, and we'll see where he ends up going. Ricky's always a little bit more popular than you think he's going to be. But there's kind of the same exact sentiment with Alex Noren on the front, that the numbers are better than they seem. The industry this week has gotten a little carried away with playing all the same players. The likes of Noren and Fowler and some guys beneath them, they're just not getting the popularity that they deserve for being top 25 golfers in my model. I think Siwoo Kim at 8,300 is worth a look again. I was expecting more from him at the Sony, but this is likely an even better layout for him, which is probably indicative of him winning the title last year. I think Carlos Ortiz is quietly one of the better plays on the board at 8,200. 14th overall in my model, inside the top 20 on easy courses and par 5 birdie or better percentage. Be sure to tune in to the Better Golf Pod with Nick and I. That is his hammer play of the week inside the top 40 market. And that hammer play very rarely loses, if ever, for Nick. So keep that in mind. And then I'm in a general agreement with Jonathan Vegas and Luke List. It's going to come down to ownership to see how much I want to play them. But I think Vegas is one of the best ball strikers in this field. And Luke List always has the distance to take apart a course. So let's see where the ownership comes in with them. But this $8,000 range for me is kind of stacked from top to bottom of guys that I'm considering.
Can I ask you something real quick? Because I see Luke List's ownership pretty high. So I'll just, if that's the case on your end, I'm off of Luke List. It's not that big a deal to me. But I would like Jonathan Vegas to be on the low end, and that's what I'm seeing now. Are you guys seeing Jonathan Vegas kind of lower in like that 5 to 8% range?
I actually have List in Vegas the same at about 11%.
I have Vegas at 12, List at about 11.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, everybody who's listening, you can get a free membership if you're not a member, by the way, at least for a week. It's actually on my page. Somebody was asking about it, a tweet I had out there. So check that out. But the point is, you can get a week-long membership. And what that will do is give you access to Steven's article, which comes out tomorrow around 5 or 6 o'clock, which will clearly define the ownership projections, really better than anybody in the industry, as far as I can tell. But, maybe I'm wrong. But I know they're pretty on point. So tune in for that, because I think you're right, Spencer. That's a big deal to me. Like, I'm willing to jump off Luke List pretty much no matter what if the ownership is higher than 10%. I think I might still buy in on Johnny Vegas regardless, though, just because of that ball striking and the potential DK point pile up over those 4 rounds.
That's the exact sentiment I said yesterday. I think List anything above 10%, I'm probably out on him there. And then Vegas, I'm more so willing to eat some of the chalk. Like, as long as he's not higher than 15%, I don't mind going to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fair number to be the threshold. Before I give my play, Spence, remind me, because when you guys give out a hammerlock, that thing hits. So I need to be on that. What was the hammerlock that you mentioned?
Carlos Ortiz, top 40. I don't know which book that's at. You can either find it on Nick's Twitter at SticksPicks, or you can find it on my Twitter at TOffSports. That's one of the last things that I posted with it. But yeah, Nick's hammer kid lock is about unbeatable.
It's every time.
I think it's actually unbeatable.
It might be unbeatable.
When he posts the kid, the GIF kid, I don't think he's lost one of those.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, so if we're getting the gift kid, that's what Ortiz top 40. There we go. That's more money in my bank. Fantastic. All right. For me,
really fast, Joel. Sorry. I tried to get it. We'll have this be number 2 mention on this show. I tried to get it to be Jason Day outright for the Hammer Kid lock of the week. Nick wasn't going for it, but that's unfortunate.
Well, listen, we haven't gotten to Jason Day yet, so listen, there's still.
It's a lock.
Well, I think we know at least one of Spencer's outright selections at the end of the show.
And by lock, what Spencer means is in his back. His back is locked. He can't. For me in this range, I'm going to keep it really simple. We're all on Vegas. I think, Vegas is the type of guy that can pay off this price tag, right? He scores well for DK. I'm with you guys. I think 15% is a good threshold. If it looks to creep up that high, I'll go off. But under 15%, I like Vegas. To me, the guy I'm a little bit different than you guys on in this range, who I like, and I know I'm a glutton for punishment, Patrick Reed. I can't get away from him. He's just a guy that, if I can get him in the 8K range in this tournament, I know he has that top 10 upside. If, we've seen the putter heated up last week, or in January. So, his ball striking wasn't great, which is concerning, but we're never going to look at Patrick Reed as the best ball striker in the tournament. That's just not his game. So I think we're starting to see more and more of the old Patrick Reed in this tournament. I think it makes sense at under 9K. So he's the other guy here that I do like, especially for tournaments, when you're coming in at sub 10% ownership, that sounds good to me. So other than that, I don't really love this range. I just think there's a lot of similarities in this range to the 7K range. So I'm going to try and, balance my ROM and some of these other guys with more of a kind of stars and scrubs type of approach. So that's it for me in the 8K range. Spence, do you want to kick us off in the 7K?
Yeah, I think I probably should kick it off since Jason Day's in this range, but I will try to keep this short while still rattling off a handful of players that are not him. This isn't exactly going to be in any particular order, but I like KH Lee at 7,400. We've seen him tee it up the first 2 weeks of the season. Neither performance has been overly exciting, but he provides a relatively good combination with his floor and ceiling at the price tag. 2 top 32s for him in his last 2 trips at the property. Brendan Steele, 7,200, has been extremely safe here in the past. 7 straight made cuts to go along with 2 top 10s. I thought Lucas Glover and Russell Knox both looked really good with their ball striking last week. I would say that they're in play. I mentioned him a little bit earlier in the show, but Gary Woodland has the upside at 7,700 that makes him worth a chance, in my opinion. The 54-hole guarantee does mean something for him, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it is give me some of these guys that they do have win equity. Maybe they have a little bit more volatility than I normally would care for, but we know at Woodland's best that he's a major winner, and that's something that's going to be important for me this week. Just we don't know where these guys are. I know I keep reiterating that stance quite a bit, but if Woodland's game turned around, these numbers are not going to be in the 7,000s anymore. And I do think there's enough of a reason to believe that it could turn around for him. Taylor Moore at 7,300 is quickly turning into one of my favorite Corn Ferry prospects. I'm limiting my exposure to how many of them I'm going to roster over the next few weeks until these stats even out. But he's the one that I'm going to be playing this week. And then last but not least, Jason Day, 7,300. I don't know if you guys know this since I try not to tweet about Jason Day. Couldn't tell you the last time I did that, but this might actually be Jason Day week. I've been watching videos of him late at night with his new swing. He looks extremely mobile coming through the ball. It's hard to know where his back is at entering the season, but we get these random moments where the unknown is a good thing. And this price is absurdly off if the back is even remotely healthy. I'm willing to take a shot because of that. And he also grades extremely well in a lot of the critical metrics that I ran, including being number 1 on short, easy courses over the past 2 years. That's during the version of bad Jason Day. So if he's number 1 in any model, he's 9th for me overall. Everyone is welcome for the free value of Jason Day this week.
Short, easy courses. Did that include putt-putt? No, par 3s.
Yeah, it includes, the way I run my model with Jason Day is anything that benefits him, I include into it. So who knows exactly what goes into it.
I heard he shot 24 under against his niece and nephew at mini golf.
I heard that too.
No,
that's
amazing.
He should be 100% owned then.
Pretty absurd. Can I ask you something about Jason Day? You said you saw, were you serious? You saw videos of him swinging?
Yeah,
And
he looks really good. His swing is a little bit different. It's a little bit more compact than I've seen it in the past. He looks healthy coming through the ball. Like I know a lot of times when I say that there's humor and banter that goes into it, and it's kind of become my shtick
and restraining
at this
orders.
point. Well, I don't know if you saw, I tried to get him on my Be the Number show. I pretty much made a whole Stan reference from Eminem, so I think I might have scared him off in that fashion. But no, Day does really look good. The swing looks good. He looks very good out there, very mobile. Like that's not for humor this week. There's a lot of weeks that I've come on this show, and even when he's not in the tournament, that I've recommended Jason Day. But this is the first week that he is top 10 in my model. I didn't do anything funny with the metrics to get him there. He's legitimately 9th overall. We'll see where the back is at because it's a PGA tournament. Who knows what will happen when the time comes for him to actually hit a ball. But this is the most encouraged I've ever been before. So take that with a grain of salt. But I really think that this tournament, Torrey Pines, Pebble Beach, these are venues that we've seen him, not necessarily here, but the other two that he's had success in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if he rattled off 3 really good tournaments in the next 3 weeks here, if he plays all 3.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Has he addressed the back issue, to your knowledge, in the last 3, 4, 5 months?
Yeah, I think he says he feels good. Like I've seen him with his swing coach. The swing coach says the back looks good. The swing looks good. He's swinging through it so much better. Like we see these videos of Jason Day to where he can't even bend down to get his tee. He can't get his ball out of the hole. He's swinging with ease and picking up the tee with ease on it. And that's what's encouraging to me, is that not only do the metrics say that it likes him this week in my model, but the videos are actually looking good. And, I don't know why I added that I'm watching them late at night. I'm probably watching them at any point in the day. We don't need to make it like sexual with it. But I like Day this week.
I don't even know what you're like. We didn't say anything. You did that. Hey, but here's the thing. I think it's really interesting because a lot of people are going to do stars and scrubs. I kind of recommended, but I think a really interesting way to attack this, at least with one of your builds, is to go balanced. And I think even though Jason Day is at 7,300, which by the way is same price as Troy Merritt, and he's less than Denny McCarthy, which is like pretty crazy if you think about it. But the point I'm making, if you had a core, just one lineup, a core lineup with pedigree and balance, Ricky Fowler, Justin Rose, Jason Day, and then do what you will from there with guys that fit your model or that fit Spencer or my or Joel's analysis, that's going to be a different lineup because people aren't generally building balance. And if they are, they're probably not building balance with all 3 of those guys, let alone 2 of them. So I'm just kind of putting that out there for people. If you're going to do 10 lineups, I think it would be really interesting to have one with at least 2 of those guys, maybe all 3.
And you can fit more players than you think above them in the price tag with it. Like, even though it's balanced, I've messed around with it a little bit because fitting Jason Day at 7,300 opens up a lot with it, but you can find a couple $8,000 golfers. You can go a little bit higher than that. I don't have a ton of $6,000 players that I like, but there are a couple that I would be fine putting into a lineup. Like, there's a lot of ways to play it this week. If you do think that certain players, like the ones that you mentioned, can open up the builds a bit.
I feel like I need to
right now.
Apologize to Spence before I even say this. But my stars and scrubs approach does include Jason Day as a scrub. And I feel bad.
That's a star. That's just an added star that you got there.
No, but in all seriousness, as funny as it is, and your instinct is to laugh because you mentioned Jason Day and I think you made some really solid points. I think of anything, right? It's like, if Jason Day comes out this week and actually does top 20 or something like that and plays well, the price for him next week and moving forward is going to be high 8K, mid 8K range. And so at a 7.3, it's rare to find someone. Well, he can get hurt and not play at all, but it's rare to have that top 10 upside down there, which he definitely does have if he puts it together. So I think there are some definitely good points in this big field where he definitely does make sense for this week. For me, is there before I take over, is there anyone else that you guys wanted to mention in the 7K range?
I have a few guys that
go.
I'll mention. Michael Thompson, and I'm not going off of just last week. He looked great last week. Not only his game, but the beard. Love the look, Michael. But he is a short course specialist. He always has been. We've talked about Michael Thompson over the years. I think he's a really good course fit. He happens to be coming in hot. He's 7,500. I think he's a pretty smart play. Other 7K guys, I'm gonna name a really random one that everybody's gonna listen to and be like, yeah, I'm not playing that guy. At 7,100, Danny Lee. And here's my argument here, okay? Danny Lee completely fell off the tracks about a year ago or so. His game was awful. And then he started like something, I can't remember what happened, but he came back. I think there was something amiss with an injury or with his clubs or something like that. The model's going to hate him, but in the fall swing, he finished 7th and 2nd at Mayakoba and Bermuda. He finished 7th and 2nd, but there's no strokes gained data for those tournaments. Now, granted, those were kind of weak fields, but my point here is Danny Lee 2 or 3 years ago was a guy I was rostering in some DraftKings lineups, and he was actually pretty good. He wasn't consistent, but he was pretty good. So now we have him coming back. He seems to have found some consistency, and the models are going to completely ignore him because when he was good recently, there was no strokes gain data for it. So I just think he's a really sneaky play at 7,100. Other than that, there's not a lot of 7K guys I'm really into. I mean, obviously Lucas Glover coming off a hot week is interesting. I think Adam Long is interesting because he can really spike. He can really get hot. And I think that's somebody to consider for a tournament like this. I think you mentioned Russell Knox. I think that's okay. But outside of that, I think I'll probably end up playing a little bit of Jason Day. I think Taylor Moore is definitely interesting. He's been very, very good. The other two guys I'll address is Hayden Buckley, who was the Win Daily secret weapon last week. He's going to be a little bit popular, but listen, the ball striking and the putting is really on point. There's not much to argue with. If you wanted to take a young guy and pivot off of him, at 7,200 in the same exact spot price range wise is Alex Smalley. He actually missed the cut last week, but he's actually popped a little bit as far as the metrics are concerned since he's come off the Korn Ferry Tour. So I think he's an interesting guy that really nobody's going to roster because people will be on Taylor Moore or they might be on Hayden Buckley. So if you're really trying to get super cute, I think Smalley he's a good ball striker. I think he's a decent play.
I like it. I think that makes sense. Just a couple guys for me in this 7K range. I like what I saw last week out of Lucas Glover. I think his ball striking was, astronomical. So if he can kind of keep some of that momentum up this week, I think he can definitely compete. The price is fair enough there with him. I also like Sebastian Munoz. Munoz is the type of guy where, in these types of fields, it feels like he's a good price in the middle of the range here. You're not going to get any recent form data, but the last time he played, he played really well. He has 2 top 5s his last 3 outings. Again, that's a few months ago, but at this price, he's definitely someone that has that upside. And the last one for me, and someone who I normally don't play too much, is actually Adam Hadwitt. The main thing with Hadwin here is that it's almost like this is a course he likes, right? He's got, and just to be exact here, of his last 5 outings, he's got 4 top 10s, 3 top 5s, and a tied for 32nd. So, he likes something here. He plays well here. His form is, it is like where everyone else. He hasn't played in a while, but it hasn't been poor. So, in the 7K range, I think he's interesting. I don't love that I see him at about 12% ownership, which for him is just too high. Like, if it's 12% ownership for, one of the guys that's a every week, contributor, then it's fine. But for him who can easily miss the cut or something like that, I don't love, but I think this is a type of tournament where, I don't love a lot of guys in the 7K range. So you're just going to have to pick your spots on who you want to take a chance on. And so, there's one for me, but that's it for me. I'm not crazy about this range. I think we will be, for me, more so than normal, diving into this 6K range a bit more than I normally do. I try and usually steer shy of the 6K range, but I think we're gonna have to. For me, especially if I'm going to be focused on this stars and scrubs build, you might have to pick some of these guys and hit a few winners. So again, I like CS at the beginning of the show. It might help a little bit, the guaranteed third day, the extra 18 holes. So let's dive right into it. See, who are you looking at here in the 6K range?
Yeah, I'll just rattle off like a handful of names that I like. I'm going to start with Dylan Wu. Listen, I don't want to take a lot of like super young up and coming guys. I think that's pretty much a recipe for disaster, but I feel like I need to mention him. 20th place last week. Really good on approach. Off the tee, he can be a little shaky. That may not crush him this week, so that's just something to consider with the rough not being super penal. Obviously, on the stadium course, it may have been mentioned, there's definitely some hazards there, some bunkers along the way, some water hazards, things of that nature. But at 6,900, I think he has some upside. He's made 4 or 5 cuts dating back to September. So not only upside in terms of maybe top 20ing again, but also upside in terms of, having that fourth day ahead of him. So Dylan Wu is definitely somebody I'm thinking of. Hank Lebioda is always going to be on my radar. I think he can capture the game that we saw last year. I don't know when that's going to happen. I am starting to see a little bit of improvement relative to what we saw, 3 or 4 months ago, which was quite bad. So I think he's interesting. Hudson Swafford, I think, is a pretty decent play, pretty decent price. Where is Zach Johnson? Is he in the 6K range, or he's 6,900? I think Zach Johnson, speaking of pedigree, if you wanted to go with the pedigree narrative, throw him into your fourth spot. The short courses are certainly going to benefit him. I think he was okay last week. I think I had him in a lineup. He had a pretty good day too. I think he made the cut. I'm trying to remember. James Hahn, his metrics have been really bad, but I think he's actually a good fit for this course. So this week I'm playing course fit more than I'm playing like recent history, even going back to like 50 rounds. I'm willing to take a guy that I think is a good ball striker at times, especially in this range. I'll mention Paul Barjon at 6,100 just because he is 6,100. He's a guy that often makes the cut, and for whatever reason, he's always in the 6K, 6,100, 6,200 price range. He should probably be closer to 6,500, 6,600, so you're getting some value there. Oh, and Nick Taylor. Nick Taylor should be great on this course. His history here is pretty good as well.
I love it. That was, I think, we made some real solid plays there. How about you, Spence? Who are you looking at down here?
I also like Nick Taylor. I won't go into any depth with him. I wanted to add one thing to Sia's Dylan Wu call. So when I run my in-tournament model, one of the things I do is I look how somebody's striking the ball, and then I add in their baseline short game numbers above or instead of what they actually have produced. On Friday night of the Sony, Dylan Wu theoretically should have been winning the tournament if everybody got their baseline average. So I think Dylan Wu does have a little bit of upside. I think the putter let him down more than it should have over the first couple days. I like Sia's boy Henrik Norlander at 6,900. He doesn't have the best course history since 2017, but he's made every cut, including a 12th last year. I agree with Sia's overall sentiment also of I don't want to be playing a lot of these young up-and-coming guys. I think it is a recipe for disaster, but maybe Davis Riley at 6,800. My numbers really like him. Dylan Fratelli is always worth a second look when he can open things up off the tee with his distance. He's carrying less than 1% ownership right now and is the prototypical boom or bust target that gets a boost with there being an extra 18 holes guaranteed. I also like Hudson Swafford. His ball striking looked great last week. If he can get the putter going, he's second for me in total driving. Sepp Straka is somebody I've never had success with when I've mentioned him before at 6,700. He does have a fourth place here in 2020 that's sandwiched in by 2 missed cuts, but he gained 3.1 strokes with his irons last week. Tyler McCumber, 6,600. That's another guy where I think his distance might be able to come into play here. And then JT Poston, 6,400. 3 top 37s to go along with 2 missed cuts since 2017 at this tournament. Part of the reason for his success is the par 5 scoring. He ranks inside the top 30 in this field. He is about as boomer bust as you can get. Before last week, he had missed 8 cuts in a row, but he gained with his ball striking last week. And if he is getting hot, I recommended a top 20 on him on Better Golf at 9.5 to 1. That is with ties paying in full at a certain book with that. But I think he's a guy that you could play in the top 40 market. Take a chance with him at plus 320 also.
I'm laughing because I had 4 guys I wanted to run through in the 6K range, and you mentioned 3 out of the 4. So strange that we're on the same guys. That's a good thing. Great minds think alike. So that means we're seeing something that we like here. My first was Davis Riley. I think, coming off a good week. He's the only young and up-and-comer I'm playing. I agree with you guys. You don't want to overdo that, but I think he does make some sense here. My second was Dylan Fratelli. Again, he's almost like in that legacy kind of thing where it's like, this is a guy who's been around. He's shown success. Getting him in that 6K range, he has the upside more so than some of these other guys. So he's definitely someone who I think you can play in tournaments. JT Poston, he was another guy who we've seen pop. I mean, and him more recently, he's very much so a boomer bust type player, Poston, but we've seen him bring it for some of these tournaments where he gets that top 10 upside, which is kind of what you need to take down a tournament like this. And the last one that you guys didn't mention that I like down here is Wesley Brian. Wesley Brian's a guy that kind of consistently has been pretty good. I mean, if you're just looking at, granted, he doesn't play all that much. So he doesn't, it's not like he's in every week and things like that. But if you just look at his player card over the last tournaments that he's played, he's been gaining strokes pretty consistently. Even at the Sony Open last week at 27, now that was a hot putter, but he also gained 3 strokes in the field on approach. So I think he's the one that can compete. And again, you're not getting an all-star golfer in the 6K range, so you want someone who can compete, snake a few putts that week, and kind of rise the leaderboard. So I think that's what you're getting with Wesley as well.
Okay, I got to point out, I think Wesley Brian is a really interesting play. I think I'm going to have to, again, I'm not just playing one tournament every week. So, I'm playing a handful, 5 to 10. I think Wesley Brian's got to be in one. So the story on Wesley Brian, I guess he had that injury about a year ago, and he was just a disaster, both with approach and ball striking in general, approach off the tee. Prior to that, though, he was like an approach specialist. And it looked, Joel, to your point, it looks like he's getting that back. I mean, I'm looking, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8 out of the last, I'm approximating 16, 17 tournaments. He gained significantly on approach in about 12 of them. 2 he lost and 2 he minimally gained. It's off the tee that's been his problem, but the approach game is there, and the putter seems to be pretty good. So I think that's a really sneaky guy that maybe in 6 months we're talking about him just in the regular course of a low 7K range instead of in this 6K range. I think that's somebody that's really interesting. 2 other guys I wanted to point out real quick. If you're just looking for scoring, taking some chances in the 6K range, these guys are really low, 6,400 and 6,200. Brandon Hagee and Chesson Hadley. Both these guys can go flag hunting in DK points last 50 rounds. They're both in the top 15. And in birdie or better game, they're both in the top 15. And in DK points, they're both in the top 25. So it's just, again, if you're taking chances, you're throwing darts, maybe you're making a lot of lineups, I think either of those guys might be worthy of putting in a lineup because they can score.
Yeah, and Nick also liked Wesley Brian, just to throw that out there. So,
cool.
Yeah.
See, I do find it interesting that's a coincidence. We didn't discuss this, and that we're all on a lot of these same guys. And I find that to be a coincidence more so in the 6K range than anywhere else, because that's where there's the most theoretical randomness. And we happen to be targeting the same guy. So good or bad, I don't know, because that probably means I'm sure we're not the only ones. And so ownership will probably be a little higher on those guys. But
I doubt it.
But
yeah, I mean, we're looking at like 1% on JT Poston, 1% on Dylan Fratelli. Maybe that goes up a little bit, but I didn't see like 7% plus on a lot of those guys. Maybe Davis Riley was the one guy that started getting a little bit more up there. I think he's 7% right now. But yeah, a lot of those guys were lower ownership guys, so that is intriguing.
It's intriguing, yeah. So I think at least it helps in terms of if you are going to dive down here, you don't want to be just throwing random darts because that's not going to do you any good. So at least it narrows that player pool down. Find some of these guys that you might want to lean on to fill out your player pools. But that's a wrap for the salaries for the DK ranges. We're going to close up. Unfortunately, listen, we try to give you guys the home run every week. It's not our fault that DraftKings is intentionally not releasing the line because they know we're going to give out winners and bankrupt them. If I was them, I would do the same thing. So
yeah, I get it.
Give you a first round leader today because there's no line for us to talk about. However, we can tell he's going to win the tournament. And you know what? That's also fun, and that'll also make you a lot of money. So we'll go ahead right now. We'll take a look at some of this outright market. Spence, you want to kick us off? Who you got in the outright market?
Yeah, we'll bankrupt them in a different way this week. But Siwoo Kim, 60-1. And this is, by the way, it's going to be, I am dart throwing down the board here. I'm not going to have much exposure to the outright market this week. But Siwoo Kim, 60-1. Justin Rose, 55-1. Taylor Moore, 100-1. And then the Hammer Jiff lock of the week, Jason Day, 130-1.
130's I like that.
It's a great number.
I'm not a Jason Day guy. I don't like to bet on Jason Day. This is not a thing for me, but I am sold. And you can't normally, I hear you every week and you talk about him, and I'm normally like, no, I'm not playing him. But this week, I'm kind of like, I like it. I like it this week.
This would be the set of tracks to play him if you're banking on him being healthy and being the ball striker that we know he can be. 130-1. Yeah, I'm signing up for that as well.
I'm going to go crazy. I'm really going to go deep here. I'm going to go with John Rahm at 5-1. Listen, in all seriousness, I actually do think it's not a terrible bet. I do think he's going to do really well.
I think he's going to win, unfortunately.
I think he's going to win the tournament. Yeah. He's the best golfer. I think maybe the preferred way to go, because you're only getting 5-1, is get him on a top 5 at even money, which I also think is a really good bet because let's not forget this tournament, like you see Cantlay up the top and you're kind of maybe see Finau, but after that, it's a pretty big drop. There's not 10 guys you can put even in that all-star class here. So to see Jon Rahm fall to the top 5, I think he'd have to really kind of fall apart. So I like Rahm if you want to put a bet on him like that. But in terms of the more fun, who are we swinging for the fences with? I think two guys, two long shots I have right now. Aaron Rai, if you want to take a shot, 151. Not someone I'm playing in DK, but it's someone I like as a 151 long shot. I like that. And the guy we mentioned is Davis Riley at also 151.
Yeah, I like that Davis Riley number. I considered that heavily, but I decided to go Taylor Moore. I didn't want to have too many Corden Ferry guys, so I made a decision there. But I think Davis Riley is definitely in play in a lot of different ways this week.
Totally. See, how about you? Who are you looking at here?
So keep an eye on my Twitter for first round leaders. I posted my first round leaders before Thursday tipped off last week, and Kevin Na was one of those guys. So if you tailed that, you obviously cleared plus 4,000 on that, which is pretty awesome. So we don't have first round leaders now. There's a few guys I have my eye on, so I'll just tease it a little bit. Carlos Ortiz, I think, is a solid play. Sebastian Munoz, first round specialist, of course. James Hahn, that number is going to be astronomical and very fun. And Justin Rose. Most of those guys I just mentioned are starting on La Quinta, which should be the easier course. Rose is on the Nicklaus Tournament course. I think List might be interesting depending on the number on the Nicklaus Tournament course. But anyway, stay tuned to my Twitter because I'll post definitely well before the tournament starts. Okay, so my outrights, I have 5. And only 2 are ridiculous. Actually, I have 4. I just added Jason Day, so I'm not even going to count that. I'm on Jason Day at 131, so I only have 4. Okay, so I'll start with the longest odds. Hayden Buckley at 110 to 1. Listen, I think there's going to be regression with him like a lot of these young guys, but maybe that regression doesn't start now, and maybe somehow at 110 to 1, he's contending on Sunday. I mean, the way he's striking the ball and putting, like if you put somebody else's name behind him, if you put like Corey Connor's name behind him, you'd be like, oh yeah, this guy has a chance. So I can't just bank on regression. So I'll go ahead and take the 110 to 1 number on a guy that I was on last week and I'm going to be on again this week. Johnny Vegas at 70 to 1. I don't think he has a ton of win equity, but I do think he's such a good ball striker. If he gets hot with a putter, he could be in good shape. Justin Rose at 55 to 1. I kind of like that. I just think everybody's sleeping on Justin Rose for good reason, but I think he could easily just wake everybody up this particular week. And Will Zalatoris at 45 to 1. Listen, do I think Will Zalatoris is going to beat Jon Rahm in a tournament? No, but 45 to 1 for a guy that is also kind of a relative unknown, at least right now. I think that's a pretty big number. I think if this same tournament's being played 2 months from now, I think his number's 28 to 1. So I'll take the 45 right now.
See, we saw this maybe not necessarily with Jon Rahm in the tournament, but during his hot run, he was like 18 to 1 in some of those fields.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, yeah, from a pure value standpoint, I think Zalatoris is an intriguing play this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, we did it, guys. We gave you the winners. You're welcome, of course. But, I think this is going to be a fun week. Tune in. Follow us on Twitter. Get in Discord. We do have those first round leader plays coming out. Seal will have his secret weapon, which has been in Fuego. Again, at CNJot, at TF Sports for Spence, and I'm at Draftmaster Flex. Is there anything else, Sia, that I might?
So 2 things. Thank you for reminding me because I would have forgotten myself. 1, check out the Better Golf Pod. For those of you that are still tuning in, check out the Better Golf Pod. That's always a great listen. You get Nick Bretwish's perspective, which is kind of important. And God, man, there was one other thing. That's right. Sports.